Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gut Brain Connection webinar. I'm Dr. John Arns. A little bit more about who I am in a second here, but first, I just want to thank you for tuning into this video. You're going to find the information extremely valuable in your journey towards better health and wellness. It's a lot of information. I usually do this workshop in a live setting. I'm condensing it down to a 20-25 minute video, so hopefully I'm not rushing through it too fast for you. But if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and contact me. I'll be sharing that contact information at the end of this webinar here in a second. But we'll get started here. Like I said, I'm Dr. John Arns. I'm a structural chiropractor, and I practice in St. Michael, Minnesota. And as a structural chiropractor, my focus is on something called structural correction of the spine. And with that, correcting and optimizing the nervous system and brain function. And with that, we get a lot of people dealing with chronic health challenges, which we're going to talk a lot about here in a minute. I'm also a member of the Weston A. Price Foundation. And that foundation, our goals are to utilize traditionally prepared nutrient-dense foods to optimize the health and function and longevity of the body. In our practice, we have an underlying paradigm, philosophy we operate with called salutogenesis, or salutogenic paradigm. Traditionally, most clinics in the Western world in the United States have more of a pathogenic type of approach, so they react to pathology once it develops in the body. With the salutogenesis paradigm in our clinic, our approach, we focus on factors that support human health well-being rather than the factors that cause disease. So we really focus on everything we can do in our day-to-day lifestyle that's going to help the body function more optimally for better longevity and to avoid health and or avoid disease long term. And as you'll see in this webinar, if you can optimize the function of your gut health and your brain health and they work together, you're really going to be standing on a strong foundation for health and longevity long term. And the information I'm presenting here, it's not my opinion. It's coming from some of the latest research, journals, books, articles on the topic of gut and brain health and how they are related to chronic degenerative diseases, autoimmune diseases, mental health type of issues. And you see it, a lot of it's the same underlying cause with dysfunction of the gut and the brain. So the outline here, we're going to go through the next 20-25 minutes is, one, what's going on? So what's the problem? Two, why are we having this problem with humanity? Why are we so sick? Why are there so many chronic degenerative diseases? And three, now that we know why it's happening and what the problem is, what's next? What's the solution to correcting these health issues that have become so widespread in the world, especially in the United States? So the impact of autoimmune disorders, very common. 50 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder. There's over 100 autoimmune diseases. And we're seeing a huge increase in these diseases over the past several decades. It's more prevalent in women, and that's mainly because of hormonal differences between women and men. And it's a huge economic burden, $100 billion spent per year on it. And researchers believe the increase in autoimmune incidence around the world is due to a combination of genetic predisposition and environmental factors. Predominantly environmental factors are the issue, which are things we can control. Genetic predisposition, some people are unable to detoxify as well as others. So it makes it tougher to overcome those environmental stressors that we're going to talk a little bit more about here in a second. Here's a quote from a book called The Autoimmune Epidemic. 1 in 69 women below the age of 50 will be diagnosed with breast cancer. Obviously a serious issue. As many as 1 in 9 women of childbearing years will be diagnosed with an autoimmune illness. So breast cancer gets a lot of the attention. Autoimmune illnesses are much more common, and there's a huge economic burden associated with that. And actually, researchers are showing, the research is showing that a lot of the same things that cause autoimmune illness are causing cancerous changes in our cells as well. A lot of the same underlying causes to all these issues, as you'll see, it's due to our environment and the environmental stressors that affect our body. A lot of different autoimmune diseases. Basically, you pick a tissue in the body and You can get a different autoimmune disease depending on that type of tissue. Essentially, an autoimmune disease is what our immune system is essentially attacking its own tissues due to inflammation. That inflammation can be caused by different things. But any area of the body where we start to attack our own tissue, potentially get an autoimmune disease in that area. Anxiety is obviously a very common thing as well. Most common mental illness in the U.S. affects 40 million adults and 80% of the population. A huge economic burden at $42 billion. 1 in 8 children have anxiety as well, or will have an anxiety disorder, so it's not just adults. Obviously, 9 million children here have an anxiety disorder in the U.S. World Health Organization, depression is the #1 cause of disability worldwide. It accounts for 13% of the global disease burden. And by 2030, it's expected to be the largest contributor to disease. And what does that tell you about the direction we're heading with our approach to correcting these problems? It tells us, obviously, that what we're doing isn't working if we're expecting it to get worse by 2030. So a lot of the research is showing that depression is linked to gut-brain axis dysfunction. So axis, basically think the connection between the gut and the brain, there's dysfunction there, and that leads to a lot of different problems, depression, and any mental health type of issue also being part of that. Again, not just adults, 1 in 33 children will have a major depressive disorder, and 1 in 8 adolescents. 43% or 32 million children have at least one of 20 chronic health conditions. If we add obesity to the list of chronic health conditions, this number goes up to 54%. So very common in children as well. Obviously, over 1 out of every 2 children will have at least one of 20 chronic health conditions when we add in obesity. A lot of times they have multiple of those conditions going on at the same time. Impact of chronic illness. Again, 107 million Americans have at least one of 6 chronic health conditions. So that's cardiovascular disease, cancer, COPD, asthma, diabetes. 70% of deaths are related to chronic health conditions. And we know these chronic health conditions can be prevented through lifestyle choices. We also know viral infections, which is obviously something very pertinent right now. What makes us much more likely to have a viral infection and to have poor outcomes related to viral infections is having underlying chronic health conditions. So if we can control those things, in theory, we can also prevent a lot of viral infectious diseases due to its effect on our immune systems. 50% of people have at least one chronic health condition. Again, a huge economic burden, $2.3 trillion per year spent on chronic disease and mental health. So obviously a huge problem. Now we want to figure out or learn, why do we have these problems? What's going on in the body? And we're going to start by breaking down mechanical systems first. So mechanical system, like a vehicle. What does a vehicle need to function normally, optimally? It needs parts, power, and information. It needs obviously the wheels, the underlying framework, the engine. All those things are needed for this vehicle to function optimally. It also needs power. It needs gasoline, oil, and information. It needs a driver to get from point A to point B. So you take away any one of these things, parts, power, information, how well does that vehicle function? It doesn't function well. You can take away a few of the parts, maybe get away with the door and windshield and still drive. The most part, we need all of our parts and power. We need gasoline to get from point A to point B, and we need information. We need a driver to get us to where we want to go. How do computer systems work? So we'll break down a computer system. What do they need? Same thing here, parts, power, and information. Same thing you're seeing over here on the left. We need all the parts, the keyboard, the video card, the processor. We need the power, we need battery, we need electricity, we need information, we need an operating system. How well does a computer function without any one of those things? Without parts, it's not going to function very well. Without power, it's not going to function at all. Can't function without an operating system, without your information. We need all 3 of these together working in unison for this computer to function optimally. Applying that now to living systems. What do we need as a living system, as a human being? We need parts, power, and information. All of our parts, heads, shoulders, knees, toes, everything in our body we need to function optimally. Now you can get away with a few of the parts, but ideally we'd have all those things there. Power, we need food, we need water, information. That's the brain, which communicates with our body, controls all function of our body. We're going to learn a little bit more about the brain here in a second, but how well does the human body function without any one of those things? We can get away without an arm or a leg. It's not ideal. So we can get away with a few of the parts. We absolutely need good food. We need water and information. We need our brain functioning optimally. And most doctors in the US obviously are parts doctors. They focus on the parts. We have specialists in every part of the body. But how many doctors focus on power? How many doctors focus on information, the brain aspect of health, optimizing brain function, optimizing nutrition? That's a huge part of a living system's health and wellness. And most doctors are strictly focusing on parts, breaking things down into specialty. They're certainly needed. They're certainly important. But most medical doctors are getting roughly 4 hours of nutrition education through their schooling. And that's just simply not enough to know everything when it comes to power and fuel and nutrition for the human body. Information, this is the part of the aspect of health that we focus on in our office, really optimizing the function of the brain through the health of the spine. Because systems are made of parts, they are all designed to eventually do what? Eventually they break down. When they're exposed to stressors, plants break down. So this plant, if we give it less light, we pollute the water you give it, you poison the soil. In other words, if you add stressors to this plant's environment, it's going to break down over time. Same concept with a human body. So what happens to a human body over time if we disturb the parts, power, and information of a human? We give it less light, less movement, pollute our water and food, expose ourselves to environmental toxins. These are environmental stressors, and these are what cause the body to break down and produce symptoms. So symptoms are a perfect expression of our environment and what's really affecting our body and causing dysfunction. Symptoms are a warning sign of the stressors that are placed on our body. This is called the gut-brain quadrangle, and it explains graphically how different diseases or secondary conditions, is what I like to call them, develop in the human body. It's taken from the autism quadrangle from Paul Hardy. So essentially here on the left, we have environmental stressors, physical stressors, chemical stressors in our food, mental and emotional stressors. These are the primary causal factors of bodily disease and dysfunction. These are primarily what cause the dysfunction of the human body. In the center here, we have the human body starting with individual genetics. Some people are more susceptible to not being able to detoxify as well. So genetics play a component of it, but predominantly it's the environment, again, causing bodily dysfunction. And we have our nervous system, our brain, which controls our immune system, detoxification system, GI system. So essentially the human body here in the center. And these environmental stressors, when combined with malnutrition, so poor diet, over the course of time, our bodies are exposed to these stressors and we're malnourished. That causes oxidative stress here in the center, which leads to inflammation of the body, which then results in different disease presentations or symptoms. So this whole process plays out over time. Stressors plus malnutrition cause oxidative stress to the human body, which results in inflammation of the body and different secondary conditions associated with that inflammation. Gut-brain disorder trifecta, we're showing here again how our environmental stressors cause breakdown and dysfunction in the human body. So environmental stressors cause something called the microbiome to break down and be depleted over time. All these stressors break down the microbiome. We're going to talk about the microbiome here in a second. It's basically a complex ecosystem of viruses, bacteria, fungi within our guts, on our skin. It protects us. It's a protective film. If we keep it healthy, these microbes actually work with us to keep us healthy. This microbiome can be broken down by these various stressors you see here, which causes something called leaky gut. Maybe you've heard of leaky gut. We'll talk about it here in a second. Once we get leaky gut, our defense system, our filter in our gut breaks down, and all these foreign compounds can get into our bloodstream. Once these bad guys get into our bloodstream, they can get up to our brain and cause something called leaky brain. So our brain has a protective barrier called the blood-brain barrier, and that can break down. Once that happens, we get more complex issues, autoimmune reactions, immune hypersensitivity. All these things, these processes play out over time from the moment we're born. So at the bottom here, multiple nutritional deficiencies and metabolic toxicities leads to the breakdown and integrity of our normal gut lining, which leads to exposure to all these foreign proteins and chemicals in our blood, which leads to the breakdown of our brain and other tissues, which leads to more complex autoimmune and brain inflammation types of conditions. A little more here on leaky gut. All these triggers up here that can cause leaky gut: poor diet, antibiotics, stress, toxins, alcohol. Normally we like these nice tight gap junctions in our gut lining. These are the intestinal mucosal cells. Those break down over time due to these stressors, which causes leaky gut. Now all these foreign compounds and proteins can get in our bloodstream, and we get these circulating immune complexes circulate through our blood, break down our blood-brain barrier, cause inflammation of all our tissues, which leads to autoimmunity. Now our immune system's reacting to all these compounds that have gotten into our blood that should have been blocked due to these stressors that have broken it down. This is kind of a negative cyclical pattern now, because once these foreign compounds get in the blood, they bind to nutrients, and those nutrients can no longer be utilized by our cells, so we get malabsorption and nutritional deficiencies associated with leaky gut syndrome. It's an interesting video. This guy talks about just how significant our microbiome is. So pretty crazy video showing how significant microbes are in our bodies and the protective role they can play. Obviously, if we pervert our normal healthy environment, those microbes there can be an imbalance there, and they can cause obviously problems, infectious diseases and different things. But when we treat our bodies correctly, we put our bodies in the right environment, these microbes work with us to keep us healthy. So signs you have leaky gut and a leaky brain: bloating, gas, cramps, food allergies, leaky brain, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. You can kind of go down the list there. All sorts of different conditions are triggered by the same underlying causes, the breakdown and the integrity of the microbiome and the gut and the brain. The top 7 things that cause leaky gut: on the left, gluten and grains, sugar, artificial sweeteners, conventional meats and dairy, refined vegetable oils like canola oil, sunflower oil, soybean oil. They're all highly processed. GMO foods, pesticides, environmental chemicals break down the gut and cause leaky gut. For more questions about any of these things, please feel free to reach out and ask me. Foods that help leaky gut: bone broth, very healing to the gut lining. Raw cultured organic dairy. We want raw because processed dairy is inflammatory due to the heat that is used to process dairy. It denatures the proteins and makes them inflammatory. Fermented vegetables, kimchi, sauerkraut, coconut products, the good fats help heal the gut lining. Sprouted seeds, the reason we want sprouted is because sprouting makes the nutrients much more bioavailable and gets rid of anti-nutrients in seeds. Organic grass-fed beef and lambs, high in good fats, like omega-3 fats. Same thing with wild-caught salmon. Want to avoid the farm-caught salmon. So stick with these things to help heal a leaky gut. Avoid these foods because they cause a leaky gut. All right, a little bit more about the brain. It's called the gut-brain connection. So we want to talk about the brain. The brain is composed 60% fat, so good fats are extremely important, primarily saturated fats and cholesterol. Generates up to 25 watts of power and uses 25% of your body's oxygen and energy needs. So 70,000 processes thoughts per day, obviously depending on the individual. It's an extreme amount of just repetitive thinking in the mind. 11 trillion bits of information per second. It's an extremely advanced computer system, if you can think of it that way. So yeah, master computer system processes all sensory information, sends messages to the body. It's responsible for our ability to adapt to our environment, to do literally everything in your body. It's dependent on function of your brain. So we have brain signaling through our spinal cord, all through our spinal nerves, controlling all function in our body. It's an extremely important organ. And without the brain, none of the other systems will function optimally. Oop, lost my spot here. Some facts about the gut now. So the gut's often called the second brain or the enteric nervous system. That's because it produces different neurotransmitters that our brain uses. 90% of our body's serotonin is made in the gut. 70% of our immune cells are found in our digestive system. Extremely important for our immune system. It contains, again, 100 trillion bacteria and 500 to 1,000 different species, so trillions and trillions of microbes. So a literal connection between our brain and our gut is something called the vagus nerve, which is part of our autonomic nervous system. So there's a literal connection there between the brain and the gut. There's a visual graphic of the vagus nerve running from the brain down the spine into the gut, controlling all of our internal organ systems and regulating those. The autonomic nervous system is part of the nervous system that automatically controls our heart rate, healing, digestion. You can see all the different organ systems it controls here. We have two parts to it. The sympathetic, which is the part where we're breaking down as part of survival. It's the flight or flight system, gets our heart rate up. On the other side of that, we have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for growth, potential, resting, healing. Most humans are in a constant sympathetic state. They're constantly breaking down. They're constantly stressed. We need to do things to start to regulate the parasympathetic nervous system, put our bodies in a more healing state. Some research here showing how just stress alone alters the gut-brain connection. So just being in a stressed out state will produce stress hormones, which affects our immune system because those hormones regulate our immune system, creates more inflammatory cytokines, which can inflame our gut. And once the gut breaks down, obviously those bad guys get through due to leaky gut. They get into our bloodstream and they go up to the brain and affect the brain. So it's just a negative cyclical pattern that occurs in the body. This research is quite interesting, just showing how, again, how stress, mental stress or perceived threats can cause inflammation in our body and lead to these different health conditions like asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, create inflammation in the body. Now, traditionally, we had physical threats and we had a short-term sympathetic response, which helped our survival. Nowadays, we have chronic contemporary social threats or perceived threats, deadlines, work, family, stress associated with all those things creates long-term inflammation and actually weakens our immune system and decreases our chances of survival, makes us more vulnerable to viral infections. Book here showed how early life stress alters the brain. So the earlier you are exposed to these stressors, the more likely you are to have various dysfunctions associated with that stress down the road. So it's obviously we want to start teaching our kids to try to be healthy from a young age. Some research showing how our gut bacteria influences our psychology. So basically what researchers did was they gave rats good bacteria, so probiotics, And what they saw was that helped improve their anxiety, their mental health conditions. But when they gave the rats the same probiotic but cut that vagus nerve, that connection between the brain and the gut, the probiotic didn't work. So this just shows that we need a healthy connection between our brain and our gut in order for those systems to function optimally, not just one or the other. We need both together. More research talking about that vagus nerve, which our vagus nerve helps upregulate our parasympathetic nervous system. It puts us in a more relaxed state. And all this research shows that when we have a vagus nerve that's not functioning optimally, there's a higher incidence of these different chronic diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, fibromyalgia. You can go down the line. When we have imbalance between our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, we have too much sympathetic, we put our bodies in an inflamed state, and it makes us more vulnerable due to the effect on the brain and the gut for diseases long term. In medicine, in Western medicine, they're starting to do some more research on how they can stimulate that vagus nerve to decrease inflammation levels. So the vagus nerve has anti-inflammatory properties. So they're trying to stimulate the vagus nerve from the outside in. It's a surgical procedure and it often does cause side effects. So what if there's a way we could stimulate the vagus nerve without having those side effects? Well, there is. We're going to talk about those here in a second. The signs: you have autonomic imbalance, low parasympathetic here, so constipation, depression, you can go down the list here, and high sympathetic, constantly stressed out state, diarrhea, irritability, anxiety, excessive sweating, can all relate to these at some point in our lives, I'm sure. So we want to balance that autonomic system to get more even sympathetic and parasympathetic firing in the brain and nervous system. 10 ways to improve your vagal tone: positive social relationships. Cold showers actually improve vagal tone. Gargling stimulates the vagus nerve, same as singing and humming. Massages are excellent for activating that parasympathetic nervous system, stimulating your vagus nerve. A good laugh every day, stretching, deep breathing, exercise. And a common one that, or say it's not so common in mainstream society, is something called structural chiropractic, which is what we focus on in our clinic. And structural chiropractic, what that does is adjustments of misalignments of the spine, structural shifts, help balance the autonomic nervous system by stimulating that vagus nerve. So this research shows how correction of misalignments in the spine, something called a vertebral subluxation, helps balance the nervous system and put our bodies in a more healing state. Lots of research showing this. Neck adjustments had a parasympathetic or vagus stimulating effect on the body, put our bodies in a more healing state. Chiropractic adjustments reduce inflammation. People will say, well, how does it possibly reduce inflammation? That's because when we take physical stress off the spinal cord and off the neural tissue that is integrated with the spine by adjustments, we upregulate the parasympathetic nervous system by stimulating that vagus nerve and puts our body in a more balanced autonomic state and a more healing state. So what is a structural shift? Simply, it's a misalignment to the spinal column that negatively affects our brain and our body, our neurophysiological function. So our overall physiology is negatively affected when we have a structural shift in the body. And a common one is something called anterior head syndrome. That's when the head shifts forward. When the head shifts forward, we get this tension in the brainstem, which comes out of the base of the skull. This negatively affects blood flow through the brainstem. Cerebral spinal fluid gets obstructed. It has negative effects on the autonomic nervous system. We talked about a lot of negative effects associated with abnormal alignment and shifting of the spinal column. Research here, more research showing how, basically again, how the vagus nerve, and we can measure that with heart rate variability. When we have dysfunction of that nerve, we have increased likelihood of poor health outcomes. Fibromyalgia, they measure this with heart rate variability. So lower heart rate variability equals a more sympathetic state. High heart rate variability, a more parasympathetic state, a better healing state in the body. And this research just showing again how when we have more autonomic imbalance, more sympathetic stressed out state, They have a higher likelihood of inflammatory types of conditions in the body, fibromyalgia, major depressive disorders. Review of the literature. This was done by another doctor. Basically, what we do as a structural chiropractic clinic is we're not trying to treat conditions. We're simply trying to optimize the normal functional capabilities of the body by restoring normal healthy alignment to the spine and function of the brain and nervous system. And with that, we get more balanced autonomic tone and a more healing state in the body. And a review of the literature shows significant improvements in all these different functional aspects of health of the human body. You can go down the line here: immune function, strength, range of motion. Because once you affect the brain, you affect the whole body, and every cell tissue in your organ benefits because of that more balanced tone of the nervous system. So what's next? It takes a village. And what I mean by that is I'm certainly not suggesting just taking care of the spine structurally is going to be the end-all be-all. We often refer to nutritionists, physical therapists, medical doctors, health coaches. It takes a gamut of health professionals to truly educate and help support you to start making better choices in life, and to start to take action to better your health over time. The Gut Brain Healing Action Plan. This just kind of gives you an outline of the direction you want to go to start to make changes in your body, starting with one, that information system, really getting the function of your brain optimized with those 10 things I showed you there. Obviously, I'm a big component of structural chiropractic care. I think that's one of the most powerful things you can do to get your brain firing, communicating with your body in an optimal way. And we want to start with this because remember, your brain controls all other systems of your body. We don't want to just jump to detox and repair. We want to start with this: add in good foods, get rid of the bad foods. Some people have different extra needs, maybe supplementation, start to get inflammation down. This will help our gut lining heal up, get rid of that leaky gut, improve digestion, improve absorption of nutrients, which over time allows our bodies to detox and repair properly. Helps balance our microbiome, keep it healthy, which is our first line of defense, heal our blood-brain barrier. And with time, emotional support from your entire family, taking care of yourself, being patient with the process, your body will heal and get better. Our bodies replace our organs, our tissues replace themselves every 7 years, except for our neural tissue. That's a little different. But what does that tell you? With time, if you start changing your environment, your body will start to build new healthy cells over time. So with that, thank you for listening. I know I went that fairly quickly, so if you have questions, please reach out to me, drjohnarns@gmail.com. Be happy to answer any questions associated with health, with gut-brain connection, with chiropractic care. You can also go to our website here, www.completechiromn.com. There's more contact info on there. But with that, start taking action. Just start to educate yourself. Build awareness in all these different tools and things you can do to get healthier over time. And with that, one of the things I always stress to people is change your time preference. We always want stuff here and now, and that's just not how the world works. So we have to accept that. We need to change our time preference in the sense that we got to start thinking long term. It might not feel like you're making very significant change if you measure your time preference in days and even weeks. But if you measure your time preference and measure your changes in terms of months and years, you'll be a little more patient with the process. And with time, you're going to notice those changes and you're going to reap the rewards of taking action to better your health and your body long term. So thanks for listening. I wish you all very good health now and into the future. And please reach out to me if you have any questions. Thank you.